Hi, I'm Malcolm Stern, and in conjunction with my friends John and Sandra Wilson from Online Events, we're creating a series of podcasts called Slay Your Dragons with Compassion. My book of the same name was conceived and inspired by the suicide of my daughter Melissa and the journey that took me on and the internal resources that I found. All of my guests will have a story to tell around overcoming and ultimately thriving through adversity. Special thanks to the band Stairway, Jim McCarty and Louis Chinamo, for the use of theme music from their album Medicine Dance, and my engineer Owen Santiago. I hope you enjoy this series, and thanks for listening. So welcome to my podcast, Slay Your Dragons with Compassion, which I'm doing in conjunction with my friends John and Sandra Wilson at Online Events. I have an amazing range of guests. We've done almost 60 podcasts now so far, and I love doing them. And I love doing them because we hear such interesting stories, and I have such amazing conversations with people, and they're often with friends or people I've admired from a distance. But Chloe, I've admired from close up because we've actually been friends for more than 30, 40 years, I think, actually, so a long time. And I've watched your progress, Chloe, along the way, and just seen how your work is actually deeply profound. I looked at your website and it described you as a singer-philosopher, and I think that's a lovely sort of connection. But of course, we both were interested in Ram Dass in the early days, and you actually were providing some of the voice work in Ram Dass on Ram Dass retreats. You've also worked with one of my favourite composers, John Tavener. It was Mary, Mother of God, was it? Yes. And so you've really applied your voice everywhere, and I don't see you as a classic singer, i.e., you're not a sort of like you don't do pop music and great songs, but actually some of your music, especially the singing field, which I remember very well, and something else from that album, a very beautiful track, which the name escapes me right now. But you have made some really exquisite music in your time, so I'm very delighted to explore with you what has shaped you, what's made you become who you are, as we both reach this time in our lives of our elderships as well. So, yeah, that's great. So, welcome, and perhaps you say a little bit more about yourself as well, and then we can see where that runs.
Oh, Malcolm, it's lovely to be in conversation with you again, and really looking forward to this conversation. Certainly, compassion, I would say, has been the absolute ground of this work. Brought up, I was brought up in the institutional Christian church, and as much as I loved, my dad's very intense, always 3 point sermons. The power of three is the trinity of experience, and the understanding of the power of three as a mental and a communication process became really central in my own journey. And I had to kind of battle against the institutional version of Christ, if you like. Whereas I'm very rooted in an understanding of Christ, the being of Christ, the non-institutional, non-religious Christ. And that has been really, I would say, very influential in my choice to start exploring voice and language as a process or as a spiritual practice, but essentially as a practice of self-inquiry. Because I realized that the witnessing mind was the one dimension that seemed to be really seriously lacking in the arts and music world. And so I kind of started being pulled in the direction of the music industry, and then realized that I wasn't really particularly interested in making huge sums of money and becoming a kind of icon human being. So by the grace of God, I was actually able to meet John Tavener, who I started to meet at his publishers actually in London in the must have been the 80s.
Wow. Wow.
And I was just on the hunt for anybody, any sort of musician, musical practitioner, particularly working with the voice, that really walked their talk.
Yes, very important actually in all the work we're doing. Again, with alternatives, which you've spoken at many times, it's very much you can see the people who are walking their talk and the ones who are spilling out empty philosophy, and we see that in the whole consciousness movement.
Right.
Yes,
Oh,
yeah.
that's so true, isn't it? And so when we're talking about the consciousness movement, to be aware that we are learning what on earth that means, because we're seeing a kind of examples, or really sort of appalling examples of what it means to be a leader in the mainstream world. And that clearly indicates at a planetary level to us at an individual or more localized level, why is that? Why has that happened?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think that's actually a lovely line of inquiry.
Mhm.
And your answer to that would be?
Well, I was hoping you were gonna.
I was looking for enlightenment in this moment. So,
Well, it is absolutely fascinating, isn't it? I think I first got an inkling of it when I was about 13, because I was one of these reckless, teenagers that was trying to bring down the grammar school system.
yeah.
I'm obviously very grateful for being having access to academic life and everything, but also aware that that also was creating a very limited perception of what true education is, which is a direct experience of the soul of one's spirit. And so I was seeing again, without knowing how to articulate it, experiencing a real absence of that as a teenager. So I started, the inevitable, questioning everything. And I used to spend hours in my head teacher's study. She was amazing. She was so patient with me. Just saying, why am I being taught everything but what I want to know?
Yeah.
And she was great. She really, she was very empathic about it. But then it was at that point that I realized, when I was invited to conduct our reckless class of 13-year-olds, sort of hormonally driven 13-year-olds, to enter this choir competition in the school, that it was the first time that I started to experience coherence, and the power of music to activate and generate coherence in what is normally a very, very anarchic group of people. So that was really fascinating to me, and in realizing that suddenly this group became this completely, deep listening, sharing, collaborative field of communicators. And then not only for them to discover, and all of us to discover, that if we become like that, you win the show.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yes.
bizarrely, that's what happened. But it was a real message to me, and I think in many ways was the beginning of exploring a life that really took me into a really deep inquiry of the nature of the voice itself.
That's very great, very interesting. Because as you're speaking, I'm thinking that we all sort of feel like we probably have guidance in our lives. You know, we're born with whatever we're born with, and wherever that comes from, and then we're drawn towards certain areas. So I was very drawn in my 30s towards psychotherapy, and I knew that this was going to be my life.
Right,
I think as you're speaking, I realize I think everybody has a drawer, but
right,
sometimes we shut the door on the drawer and go with the security and the safety of being fitting in with the crowd. So from a very early age, what I'm hearing is that you actually that you were inspired by the voice, which has actually been your tool
right.
for all these years as well.
Yeah. Well, absolutely, absolutely, Malcolm, and very much for you too. I mean, I've just loved sitting and listening to you and exploring and learning from the way that you, activate processes of self-inquiry with people. And it is an incredible gift to dare oneself, to against all odds in many ways, to pursue the question, who am I? Why am I here? And what is mine to express? And those three questions are at the center of our work with the Naked Voice, which is my organization.
And as you're speaking again, it's like it's such a rich sort of understanding of things as well. So what I'm realizing as you're speaking is that we all have our purpose as well, and that actually, if we're following our purpose, what's happening in the world around us, unless we are right in the thick of it, and I don't want to underestimate the suffering that goes on in the world, but it's very easy to look at the world and the state of the world and think, what's the point, and despair. But actually, when we're actually sort of tuned into something that's ours to bring through, and that we're refining and honing it probably for our whole life, if not many lifetimes, but we won't go there for the moment. But if we look at that, then what we start to see is that purpose becomes the driving force behind us rather than the quest for money.
Oh
And
God.
yes, yes, yes,
Yeah, that's really what drives the vehicle for so many, doesn't it? And that's what has created the chaos that we're experiencing collectively. Is the power, and the greed,
yeah.
and the glory that apparently arises from that. And that clearly is not working. And I just feel we're living in such an exciting time because, without getting, kind of lost in spiritual bypassing, the reality is that what seems to be happening according to, a kind of an intelligence of consciousness is that it knows that it has to dismantle the present regime, the present planetary kind of attempt at, divide and conquer. That has to collapse and it has to recreate itself in a new form, just as music does.
That's interesting again. So it's like, that your thinking sort of inspires my thinking as well. So I'm sort of thinking that we can look on the collapse as we're in terrible times.
Right.
What the hell is this all about? But actually, there's an inevitability about that happening. And I remember someone saying when Trump was elected for the second time, that if Kamala Harris had been elected, we would have carried on as was. As it is, there's an enormous shift that's happened. Now, I don't know whether that's good, bad, or otherwise. And actually, we can't tell what's good, bad, or otherwise at some level. But what I can see is that the world is changing so quickly,
Yeah.
and it can easily look like the world is disintegrating. But what I'm hearing you say is also that the world is about to reintegrate or can potentially reintegrate.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's what I'm sensing. And I've learnt that so much from music and from improvisation, in a way, improvising with people, particularly people that think they haven't got a voice, which is most people,
Yeah.
when you first meet them, to actually discover that you're feeling, the feelings that you walk about with literally are music themselves, whether they're dark or light feelings. You need both. Both are required in order to create an interesting piece of music. And a transformative piece of music, which creates a third thing, if there's enough, witnessing and living presence and a balancing of the emotional with the intellectual, and the deep listening. We can then discover that there is something extraordinary can come out of actually not knowing what's going to come out of my mouth next, which is
Yes, exactly. In fact, effectively, we're all channeling all the time. Every conversation we're channeling something. However, we don't want to get too sort of about that as well. But so, what sort of has led you to this very philosophic understanding? I mean, so, obviously, I'm in tune with a lot of what you're saying, and I'm always enriched by the dialogues we have. And I did a podcast for you. You also run a podcast series, which is a very beautiful one as well. What took you to that place of inquiry and philosophy and an ability to look at the world through a slightly different lens than most people look at it?
I mean, I wonder myself. I have a narrative that we all have narratives, don't we? Which we can either buy into or not. And I carry mine quite lightly now, but there was, I think, the fact that I actually was deaf for the first between the ages of 4 and 7, largely deaf, following traumatic surgery on my ears. That in some strange way created a kind of what would be called in present jargon a kind of disability of not being able to hear. But actually, it gave me an opportunity at that time as a very unformed, open, wondrous, child, to be in nature a lot, to really explore the power of the senses, um, and the elements. So I spent quite a lot of time on my own because my mother had the good sense to take me out of school. So that was great because so I actually had, I would say, the greatest privilege of just being able to be in nature a lot more than I otherwise would have been.
But were you also terrified by your deafness?
I think there has to be. I think I've probably sort of grown through a kind of terror of, I would say, more um, of being weird.
Okay.
Being and the kind of loneliness that accompanies that, a kind of yeah, the isolation factor was definitely a factor. And I'm aware that that probably had its own bearing on my dynamics within the family, because I became very identified with the etheric realm of reality. And that is really what bridged into a deep reassurance and self confidence within the field of music, because music was like this, and particularly sound and singing gave me the opportunity
Right.
to really connect with myself, uh, albeit in a quite unconventional way, because, having had this early childhood experience, teenage life then became a research ground for emotional
Yeah.
relationships and all of that. But silence, it was always really important to me with my in my love affairs, as a teenager, that my boyfriends could be silent. You
Ah,
know, that
yeah.
was kind of a requirement. And they were very up. I mean, in many ways that enters into the wonder of falling in love with. Um, but so that had that fascination with the language and the consciousness of silence has been literally followed all the way through. And that's what really ultimately, when I realized I wasn't going to be able to be a normal music teacher in a really repressed comprehensive school, that I had to step out on my own. And then I was very involved with Quakers. So the Quaker world introduced me to Martin Luther King and to Gandhi and to the whole language of nonviolence, which opened the door and gave me more confidence to realize that what I was experiencing was really important.
Well, it's interesting because you could so easily have gone the route of becoming a hermit and or removed from society, or you could have gone the route by sort of compartmentalizing yourself so that you were squashed into being a music teacher when there was obviously a lot more that wanted to. I'm not saying anything against music teachers, by the way, but there's
No,
something about that you've broadened your horizons against the odds, I would say. So, and you've had to trust your own internal radar in order to go there. And then you meet people like John Tavener, who's probably, in terms of modern composers, one of the greats of modern composers. I mean, he is along with the Bachs and Beethovens of our time. And I wonder if we could just take a look at how that happened with John Tavener and how that panned out for you. How did you get to meet him?
well, yet more synchronicities. My father he was by now a suffragan bishop in London, in Kensington, and he had managed to bring the Orthodox Russian Orthodox Church into London, and it was through that because I was by now studying music and education at Cambridge, and the Russian Orthodox Archbishop of this Russian Orthodox Church used to come and give these phenomenal sermons on mystical Christianity in Cambridge.
Wow.
I was blown away by this, and then I followed him back to where he was actually living and working, which was at this church, and that was where John Tavener also went to church.
Aha.
And I remember going there, and I remember seeing him, and seeing this really tall sort of beam of light, really just walking about, and I gradually made my way towards him and said, I know about you. I know about your music. And I wonder if we could meet and talk. And
So
so,
you also have the confidence to be able to sort of go up to sort of like a celebrity type of figure and actually set yourself sort of like, can we connect? And then presumably he said yes.
well, he was very generous. He was very, very generous. And also, I think, possibly quite lonely as well, because it was the whole sort of musical genre that he was developing there, really arising out of ancient Pythagorean, going right back to, the potency of the musical modes. Um, and in a way, they are the equivalent of our Indian ragas, if you like. So the musical modes, I said to him, "How do you make this music? I mean, how?" The piece of music that I was involved in was called Mary of Egypt, and he called it a musical icon rather than opera. But we performed it at the Maltings, the Snape in England, and literally it just involved the power of three characters. Mary, who was a harlot who had been thrown out of the church for being the dark feminine, so called, at that time, and Zorsima, who is this monk who was coming into the desert where Mary was. She was already going through this incredible evolutionary process of her own. And it's all about the relationship between the masculine and the feminine, and how it sacralizes itself in a completely, unorthodox way, actually. Interesting that the word orthodox becomes unorthodox with John in many ways. But what he was doing there, of course, was because he brings in the animal world and he brings in the lion, and it's all the part that I was invited to sing was the Mother of God, and she had to sing off stage. Her voice, they mic'd the voice all around the auditorium, so that you just got this experience of what John described as the faceless, dark sound of the lost feminine. That must be returned to this world, and so I had to sing very, very low. And it was an incredible practice.
Wow.
And it was perfect because that was just how I loved to practice, was in this way. So it wasn't even a performative thing. It was a spiritual practice
Yeah.
to work with him. And I think that's how he was altogether. So he really initiated and deepened and reaffirmed my understanding that music is not about performance. It's not about a performer and an audience. It's really about restoring restoring living presence into the ears of humanity, I would say.
That's lovely. I remember his album with Stephen Isserlis, The Connecting Veil, which was, one of the albums that blew me away. It was just there was something exquisite about it. And so when I heard that you were doing something with him, I was sort of like, wow, that's pretty amazing, Chloe. But it's also one of the, as you say, it's one of these synchronicities and these things, what I'm realizing again as you're speaking, that these things tend to lift our confidence. You start to believe in yourself more when others start to believe in you. And so that sort of feels like that's happened all the way along the way. And I know that that you were together for a while with my friend and your ex-partner Roger Houston, and Roger was actually and you were responsible for alternatives, sort of like upping its game a lot because you brought all these large speakers into the UK, and we put them on at St James's Church, and there's something about meeting the right people. Also, you would another of your ex-partners is Coleman Barks, the great Rumi scholar, and so you've been touched by many sort of great souls, not but so a lot of people have come your way and have added their bits to the mix.
Mm.
And I wonder if you can reflect on that a little bit for us too.
It is extraordinary, isn't it? And I know that was a great gift of Roger's to literally be able to ring people up. I mean, Gabrielle Roth and Robert Bly and Marion Woodman and James Hillman. And just to say, why are you flying from America to Germany and not stopping in England?
Wow, wow. So that
So
was it.
he just had a way of, and I think that really did, thanks to your incredible expertise and gift at bringing an audience together. It was a really great collaboration between us, and that certainly really reinforced my own sense of confidence. Being essentially a very empathic and very introverted human being, it's fascinating, isn't it? How we can be actually. I'm quite a shy person, given the opportunity, given the choice, I would be sort of living in a tower. To some degree, I am actually here in Gloucestershire, but in the most glorious community. But realizing that if you have a vocation, which is obviously what the voice is about, hence the word, you just have to obey it. You have to follow it. And I think thanks to the connection and the friendship with Roger, and then this wider, field of new spiritual voices that were really coming through initially through the New Age movement, but really connected with much deeper wisdom, perennial traditions. It really gave me, an opportunity. I remember Gabrielle Roth just saying to me, would you just sing while we dance stillness? Would you just sing
Oh,
while we dance
how
chaos?
lovely.
And so that then gave me another opportunity to research what happens if you actually just sing stillness. What does that sound like? It's not like, will you sing a song, or will you perform something for us? It's more like, how does this situation, how does this context sound, you know
Mm.
and what can bring more presence and a deeper, more conscious listening to it, and that became my passion, really, was to explore that direction. And then the Naked Voice was born, very much influenced by my journey to India. Yeah. Mm.
So there's been a big, this life is a big journey for you to date, and still is. I think that's the other thing that I see is that as I get older, which of course is what we do, or die, one of the two is going to happen to us, that I see that some people retire almost like sort of drop their sense of purpose. But I also feel like I'm actually sort of, and as are you, still expanding into
Yeah.
what the potential is for our gift to bring to the world. And I'm not getting all up myself in that. It's more the sort of that actually what I see is the development that I bring as an older person, and that actually it's also a gift.
Right. Oh, that's so beautiful, Malcolm. And you such a massive wisdom keeper for people, and of course the wisdom keeper tradition tended to get lost in our Western culture, hasn't it?
Mm, it has. We sort of look at our elders as sort of, you know, people to be kept out of sight and off the way. But the
Incredible.
tribal cultures, of course, the elders were revered,
Yeah. It's
and they were allowed to bring their gift. They were encouraged to bring their gifts through.
and hence the life goes on and goes on. I mean, that the old science, that human beings are essentially flawed, is over. And if you actually listen to the new science, which is saying, that the neurons in the brain just keep reliving and living and living and living and repeating themselves, and growing, and constantly reliving themselves. um, I'm seeing people now in their 80s, 90s, moving towards the hundreds. Look at Satish Kumar. I mean, just completely dynamic, on it, and very vital, really vital. It's
Yeah.
fascinating, that, isn't it? This retirement thing. Where did that come from, do you think?
No idea. I know it doesn't interest me as a, if life insists I do it, then I may have to do it. But at the moment, I'm still inspired by new directions and explorations.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I wonder if it's also again related to the whole economy tradition, the whole economy kind of idea that, you've got to save, you've got to, get ready for the fact that you will start getting old and you will start, losing it. And therefore you've got to save money in order to, that kind of thing. And so we get caught in a kind of mindset, perhaps. You know, it's very precarious, the jobs you and I have had, because certainly if I was really interested in earning a living, I definitely wouldn't have taken this path.
No way. But if you're interested in evolving into all of what you could possibly be, you
Right,
definitely have taken this path. You have taken this path.
exactly. You cannot afford not to, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, James Hillman wrote that inside every one of us, there's a diamond, Daemon, and that diamond will drive us nuts until we do what it is we were born to do.
Right.
And I think I really see that when I've tried to go for security and safety and sort of and shrink myself, life won't let me do that. And I'm hearing something very similar, and I do recognize, of course, a kindred spirit in you,
Oh,
Chloe. Yeah.
Malcolm, absolutely. You're reminding me actually of a conversation I once had, and I have no idea. I'm just trying to remember how I got into this situation, but it was another synchronicity. I think it must have been through James Hillman. He connected us with his mentor, Robert Sardello. Um, and I remember him once saying to me, are you aware that suffering is the highest form of vitality?
Whoa, I like that. That's powerful.
Isn't
That's
that
very
cool?
powerful.
Yeah. And that's been with me my whole life, is just feeling that, so often being with people in voice workshops, and where you're really exploring the nature of the music of suffering, and how it has this kind of homeopathic dimension to it, which I've just literally discovered that from listening to people, thousands of people, by simply asking them, how do you feel and how does that sound?
Mm.
And then what quality of silence does it leave behind?
So, in fact, you are bypassing the intellect and looking for where the gut has its say.
Right, which is exactly what you're up to, isn't it? It's like,
Yes, I think of that in psychotherapy, the psychotherapy groups I run. I'm not interested in getting to understand at a sort of obvious cognitive level what's going on, but to penetrate deep into what has not yet been opened. And I
yeah.
know I did a workshop with Thomas Hübl, the great German mystic, and it was on intergenerational trauma, and I got deeply in touch for the first time with the true suffering that was in me, and rather than feeling, oh my God, I'm a wreck, it's like, thank God that's been released.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, for me, if I'm really honest with you, chaos is my best friend.
That's great. That's
It is
amazing.
my
Yeah.
best friend. It seems to be the homeopathic kind of partner of silence, of stillness. So it's it's the eye of the storm. I'm always very aware of that, of its role, the role of chaos, which is again what we're experiencing in the world right now, which is, I get very excited because everybody's waking up. People are really asking questions in ways that I've never known.
Well,
Right.
the truth is, we're not going to wake up in the ordinariness. We actually need what you describe as we've talked about with the suffering, and what I've written about in my book, Slay Your Dragons with Compassion, which you gave me a lovely endorsement for, by the way. Thank you for that. But what I realized is that although I'd gone through the enormous suffering of losing a child, which is what the book was based on and what
Yeah.
the series is based on,
Yeah.
it wasn't all bad. Now, that sounds terrible to even say that, but
Yeah.
actually, there was something that got awakened as a result. And I think awakening is often very gradual. We look at people like Eckhart Tolle who've just suddenly gone, "Poof," and he's awake. And, but I think that word awake is overused,
Oh, yeah.
and or the woke culture. But I think there is something about being molded by our experiences, and that's what I'm hearing from you. And probably that's why you and I have these deep conversations whenever we speak or meet. And we've worked for get together in compassion and mental health, and in other environments as well, where we've brought our particular gifts to the fray.
Yeah.
So we can't. I mean, I'd love to chat to you all day actually, and I could do that. But actually, we're coming towards the end of our podcast.
Yeah.
And the question I always ask at the end is, what's the particular dragon you've had to slay? What's the obstacle you've had to overcome in order to become who you are at this stage in your life?
Let's see. What have I had to really overcome? Um, I would say, shyness is actually what always comes up, but this sense of being so almost painfully introverted, actually, that it's as if I'm this calling that I've had all my life has required me to be painfully extrovert. And yet it's something to do with really having to overcome um self-doubt,
Mm.
I would say.
That's lovely. And what was very interesting is before you spoke the words, you actually embodied the very thing you'd been speaking about, which is being okay with the silence. So I was genuinely okay with the silence, whereas sometimes I might want to sort of prod someone to sort of give them a bit of a sort of like, sort of a leg up, as it were. But
Yeah.
I was just aware that you were actually searching and that actually we could be still in that searching. So you've
Lovely.
just lived out something you've spoken about as well. So that was lovely.
Well, thank you for your listening and for the quality of your listening. Always, always. Thank you.
So before you go, Chloe, I thought it'd be a wonderful opportunity to hear your beautiful voice and your amazing composing skills. And there's a track that I was really deeply touched by when I heard it many, many years ago, which is a devotional track called Om Tara, and to the Buddhist deity Tara, and perhaps you could play us a piece of that, please.
Great pleasure. So, Om Tara being the goddess of compassion. Om Tare Tutare Ture Soham. 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 Om Tare Tutare goddess of humanity, singing of the unity we long for. Om Tare Tutare Ture Soham. Om Tare Tutare Ture Soham.
You brought tears to my eyes, Chloe. Bless you. Thank you.